There is someone the avoidant person holds in their heart with permanence that feels absolute, someone who occupies space in their emotional landscape that no amount of time or distance or new relationships ever quite displaces, someone whose memory they return to with frequency that would surprise you if you knew about it, someone who represents something so significant in their internal world that even years or decades later, they still think about this person with mixture of longing and regret and unresolved feeling that never quite settles into peace. And here is the truth that's difficult to hear but important to understand. That person probably isn't you. Not because you weren't important, not because what you shared wasn't real or significant or meaningful, not because you didn't love them well or give them everything you had or deserve to be the person they carry with them always, but because the person an avoidant keeps in their heart with this kind of permanence isn't determined by who loved them best or who was most patient or who offered them the healthiest relationship or who deserved their love most completely. The person they keep in their heart is determined by entirely different criteria, by timing, by their own psychological state when the relationship ended, by whether they were the one who left or the one who was left, by how the relationship fit into their narrative about themselves and about love, by factors that have absolutely nothing to do with your worth or your value or the quality of what you offered them. Understanding who this person typically is and why they occupy this permanent space helps you make sense of your own experience with the avoidant, helps you understand why you might not be the person they carry with them, even though you gave them more than that person ever gave, helps you recognize that their internal emotional hierarchy doesn't reflect objective reality about who loved them best or who they should hold on to, helps you release any remaining hope that they're thinking about you the way you think about them, or carrying you in their heart the way you've carried them in yours. The person an avoidant keeps in their heart is usually the one who got away, not the one who loved them most devotedly, but the one they lost before they were ready to lose them, the one who left rather than being left, the one who ended things while the avoidant was still in the phase of the relationship where they felt safe rather than suffocated, the one whose absence created loss. The avoidant actually felt rather than relief they secretly experienced when other relationships ended. If you loved an avoidant deeply and gave them everything and then finally left when they couldn't meet your needs, you might not be the one they carry. If you stayed too long, if you were too available, if you let them see your desperation or your pain or your willingness to accept less than you deserved, you might not be the one they remember with longing. And this isn't fair. It isn't based on merit. It isn't reflection of reality, but it is how the avoidance psychology works. And understanding it helps you stop wondering why you're not the one they can't forget, and start recognizing that being the one they can't forget isn't actually the prize it appears to be, because the person they keep in their heart is often kept there precisely because the relationship ended before they had to face their own patterns, precisely because they lost that person before having to confront their incapacity, precisely because the ending was someone else's choice rather than consequence of their own behavior, allowing them to maintain fantasy about what could have been, rather than facing reality of what they're actually capable of sustaining. Who the person they keep in their heart actually is and why the criteria have nothing to do with who deserves to be remembered. The avoidant doesn't keep someone in their heart based on who loved them most genuinely, or who was best for them, or who offered healthiest relationship. They keep someone based on psychological factors that often reward the exact wrong person while overlooking the one who actually deserved their sustained emotional investment. Understanding who this person typically is reveals the irrationality of how the avoidance emotional memory operates. The person they keep is often someone who left them rather than someone they left, because being left creates wound that stays open, while leaving creates relief they misinterpret as indifference. When the avoidant ends relationship or drives partner away through their patterns, they typically experience relief more than grief. The pressure is gone. The expectations have ended. They have their freedom back. The discomfort they were feeling in the relationship, which they attributed to the relationship being wrong rather than to their own fear, has been eliminated. This relief prevents them from grieving the loss properly, prevents them from recognizing what they actually lost, prevents the relationship from occupying permanent space in their heart, because the dominant feeling associated with the ending is, thank God that's over, even if intellectually they recognize the person was good for them. But when someone leaves them, when the other person makes the choice to end things, when the avoidant is the one being rejected rather than the one rejecting, entirely different psychological process occurs. The loss feels real because it wasn't their choice. Their ego is wounded because they were the one deemed insufficient. The relationship occupies different space in their memory because it ended while they still felt somewhat safe in it, before it progressed to the stage where their defenses would have created the suffocating feeling that makes them want to leave. This person who left them becomes the one that got away, the one they wonder about, the one they carry with them, not because that relationship was actually better, but because the ending created wound rather than relief. They often keep someone who ended things early, rather than someone who stayed through their difficult patterns, because early ending preserves fantasy while sustained relationship reveals reality. If relationship ends in early stages, before the avoidance patterns fully emerged, before they cycled through multiple rounds of hot and cold, before their partner saw the full extent of their emotional unavailability, the avoidant can maintain fantasy about what that relationship could have become if circumstances had been different. They can remember the good parts without having to acknowledge the patterns that would have eventually destroyed it anyway. They can wonder, what if, without ever having to confront the reality that the answer to what if is the same thing that happened in every other relationship where I couldn't sustain intimacy. But if you stayed through their patterns, if you witnessed their withdrawal and their coldness and their inability to show up consistently, if you experienced the full cycle of their hot-cold behavior multiple times, if you saw them at their worst and loved them anyway, and finally left only after they demonstrated repeatedly that they wouldn't or couldn't change, you don't get to occupy the fantasy space. You saw too much reality. You experienced too much of their actual incapacity. They can't wonder what if with you, because you both already know what if. If you'd stayed longer, the same patterns would have continued. The person who left early becomes the one they romanticize. You who stayed longer become the one they remember with guilt or discomfort rather than longing. The person they carry is frequently someone who maintained mystery rather than someone who was fully known to them, because the avoidant romanticizes what they don't fully understand while devaluing what they know completely. If the avoidant never fully knew you, if you maintained boundaries that prevented them from seeing all of you, if you kept parts of yourself private, if the relationship ended before they had access to your vulnerabilities and your wounds and your full complexity, you remain mysterious in their memory, idealized, carrying potential that can never be disproven because they never knew you well enough to encounter your human limitations. But if you were fully vulnerable with them, if you showed them all of yourself, including the parts you're insecure about, if you let them see you cry or struggle, or need them in ways that revealed your full humanity, you become fully known, and what is fully known can be fully cataloged for flaws. The avoidance fear-based lens looks for reasons to devalue as defense against their own vulnerability, and the person they know completely gives them material to work with, while the person who remains somewhat mysterious can be idealized without contradiction from reality. They frequently hold onto someone who represented their youth or a specific period of their life, rather than someone who loved them more recently or more maturely, because that person becomes symbol of time period rather than being evaluated as actual relationship. The person they dated in their 20s, the relationship that existed during formative period of their life, the connection that coincided with specific chapter they remember fondly for other reasons. This person often occupies permanent space in their heart, not because the relationship itself was extraordinary, but because they associate that person with time in their life they view nostalgically. They were younger, had fewer responsibilities, felt more hopeful about life, had dreams that hadn't yet been tested against reality. The person becomes entangled with the time period in memory, and missing the time period translates into missing the person, even though the person isn't actually what they're nostalgic for. You who loved them more recently, who encountered them as more formed, but also more defended person, who experienced relationship with them during less idealized period of their life, you don't get associated with nostalgic glow. You're associated with present reality, with adult responsibilities, with who they actually are now, rather than who they imagine they were then. The person they keep is often someone who seemed unattainable or hard to get, rather than someone who showed clear, consistent love, because the avoidance psychology responds to distance and pursuit in ways that contradict healthy relationship dynamics. If you loved the avoidant clearly and showed it consistently, if you made yourself available and demonstrated your care and pursued connection even when they withdrew, you activated their deactivation system. Your availability made you feel safe to dismiss. Your clear love made you feel suffocating. Your pursuit made them feel pressured and triggered their withdrawal. But someone who was more ambivalent, who maintained their own distance, who didn't pursue the avoidant when they withdrew, who seemed potentially just out of reach, this person activated the avoidant's anxious tendencies. Yes, avoidants have them, they're just usually dormant. Made them feel like they had to pursue for once, created dynamic where they were the uncertain one. This unusual dynamic, where they were anxious rather than avoidant, often creates more intense feeling in their memory, even though the relationship itself might have been less healthy and less genuinely loving than relationship with you. The intensity they felt when they were uncertain gets remembered as passion rather than as dysfunction, while the safety they felt with you gets remembered as boring rather than as the genuine security they actually needed. They sometimes carry someone who hurt them or betrayed them rather than someone who treated them well, because the betrayal wound stays open in ways that healthy relationship resolution doesn't. If someone cheated on them, lied to them, betrayed them in significant way, particularly if this happened during vulnerable period of the avoidance life, that person might occupy permanent space in their heart, not because they were a good partner, but because the wound they created never properly healed. The avoidance tendency to avoid processing painful emotions means they often don't properly grieve or process betrayal. Instead, they compartmentalize it, defend against it, and carry it forward as open wound they never properly addressed. This unprocessed wound keeps the person present in their emotional landscape years later, even though objectively that person deserves no space in their heart at all. Meanwhile, you who treated them consistently well, who never betrayed their trust, who honored your commitments, you don't create wound that stays open. You created safety that they took for granted and eventually fled from, and taking something for granted makes it forgettable in ways that wounds are not. Why you not being the one they carry is actually evidence. You love them better, not worse, than the person who is. Learning that you're not the person the avoidant keeps in their heart hurts in specific way. It feels like evidence you weren't enough, weren't special enough, weren't memorable enough to be the one they couldn't forget. But understanding the psychology reveals the opposite truth. Not being the one they carry is often evidence you love them better and more genuinely than the person they romanticize. If you're not the one they carry, it likely means you stayed long enough for them to see your full humanity, rather than leaving early enough to be idealized, which means you trusted them with your actual self rather than performing perfect version. The person they carry in their heart often maintained performance, kept their vulnerabilities hidden, ended things before the avoidant saw their full complexity. This creates idealized memory. The avoidant remembers perfect version because perfect version is all they ever saw. But you stayed. You let them see you struggle. You showed them your fears and your wounds and your imperfections. You trusted them with your actual self rather than with curated version designed to keep their interest. This is more loving. This is more genuine. This is what real intimacy looks like. Being willing to be known fully rather than being seen only partially. The fact that you trusted them this way is evidence of the depth of your love and your commitment. The fact that they then didn't properly value this trust, that they used your vulnerability as material for devaluation rather than as gift to be honored, that they romanticized the person who never trusted them with full self over you who did. This is evidence of their dysfunction, not evidence of your insufficiency. If you're not the one they keep, it means you likely pursued genuine, intimate connection rather than playing games or maintaining distance, which means you offered them exactly what they needed, even though their wounds prevented them from receiving it. The person they carry often maintained some level of game playing, was less available, was more ambiguous, created uncertainty that kept the avoidant engaged through activating their pursuit system. This isn't healthy relationship dynamic. This isn't what secure people do. But it's what worked to keep the avoidant interested because it didn't trigger their engulfment fears. You didn't play games. You were genuine about your feelings. You communicated clearly about what you wanted. You made yourself available because you wanted genuine connection, not because you were trying to manipulate their interest through strategic unavailability. This is how healthy people approach relationship. The fact that this genuine approach didn't create the sustained interest that game playing created isn't evidence you did it wrong. It's evidence the avoidant responds better to dysfunction than to health, better to uncertainty than to security, better to games than to genuine connection. You loved them in a healthy way. Their psychology rewarded unhealthy dynamics. This is their limitation, not yours. If you're not the one they carry, you probably showed them consistent love rather than dramatic passion. And consistent love is superior to intensity, even though the avoidance psychology romanticizes the latter. The person they carry might have been characterized by dramatic highs and lows, intense fights and passionate makeups, emotional volatility that created feeling of intensity, the avoidant mistakes for deep connection. You offered something different: steady presence, reliable love, consistent care that didn't require drama to prove itself. This is more mature love. This is what sustainable relationship is built on. But the avoidant often romanticizes intensity over consistency because intensity feels like passion, while consistency feels boring to someone whose nervous system is accustomed to chaos and interprets calm as absence of feeling. The fact that you offered consistent love rather than volatile passion is evidence you are offering superior relationship. The fact that they remember the passionate volatility more fondly than your steady consistency is evidence their understanding of love is fundamentally damaged, not evidence your love was insufficient. If you're not the one they carry, it's likely because you actually confronted them about their patterns rather than accepting their behavior without challenge, which means you love them enough to push for their growth, even though it made you less comfortable to be with. The person they romanticize might have accepted their patterns without question, might have never challenged their emotional unavailability, might have allowed them to continue their dysfunction without ever naming it or asking them to address it. This creates more comfortable relationship for avoidant. No one is making them look at their wounds. No one is expecting them to grow. No one is creating the discomfort that growth requires. But you challenge them. You named their patterns. You asked them to address their emotional unavailability. You created discomfort because you love them enough to want them to become a healthier version of themselves, rather than being content to let them continue their dysfunction. This is more loving, even though it feels less comfortable. This is what people do when they genuinely care about someone's well-being, rather than just wanting comfortable relationship. The fact that they remember more fondly the person who accepted their dysfunction over you, who challenged it, is evidence they prefer comfort over growth, evidence they value being enabled over being pushed toward health. If you're not the one they carry, you likely stayed through their worst behavior rather than leaving during their best, which means you saw who they actually are rather than who they can perform being for limited time. The person they romanticize might have known them during period when they were on their best behavior, when they were still able to maintain performance, when their patterns hadn't yet fully emerged because relationship was new and their nervous system hadn't yet triggered the withdrawal response. You stayed longer. You saw them at their worst, saw them during their coldest withdrawal, witnessed their most hurtful defensive behavior, experienced them when all performance had dropped and their wounds were running the show. Seeing someone at their worst and continuing to love them anyway is an extraordinary gift. It's seeing them fully and choosing them anyway. The person who only saw them at their best didn't give them this gift. They loved curated version, not actual person. You loved actual person, wounds and all. The fact that the avoidant romanticizes the relationship where they could maintain performance over relationship where you saw them fully and loved them anyway, this reveals they're more comfortable being seen partially than being known completely. More comfortable receiving conditional love for performed version than unconditional love for actual self. What it actually means that they carry someone else and why it doesn't diminish what you shared. The avoidant keeping someone else in their heart permanently doesn't negate the reality or the significance of what you shared with them. It reveals information about their psychology and their wounds, not information about your worth or the value of your connection. The person they carry is often the one they carry precisely because that relationship never reached the stage where they had to face their incapacity, which means that relationship never tested them the way yours did, never demanded their growth, never revealed their true limitations. The person they romanticize often exited before the relationship reached stage where the avoidance patterns would have fully emerged, before their wounds created the damage that eventually destroyed other relationships, before they had to choose between addressing their attachment issues or losing someone important. This early exit allows the avoidant to maintain fantasy. That relationship could have worked if circumstances had been different, if timing had been better, if external factors hadn't intervened. They carry that person as symbol of what might have been, never having to confront reality, that what might have been is what actually happened in every relationship they've had since. Patterns emerging, intimacy triggering fear, withdrawal destroying connection. Your relationship didn't allow them this fantasy. You stayed long enough to see their patterns. The relationship reached stage where they had to face their incapacity. They couldn't wonder, what if, with you, because you both lived through the what if, and it ended the same way it always ends when they don't address their wounds. The fact that they carry someone else doesn't mean that relationship was superior. It means that relationship ended before exposing their limitations the way yours did. They often keep someone else in their heart because that person represents their own idealized self-image rather than confronting their actual self. Your relationship made them face who they actually are, which is uncomfortable truth they'd rather avoid. With the person they romanticize, the avoidant can remember themselves as better version, as person capable of deep feeling, as person who almost sustained genuine intimacy, as person whose patterns were circumstances dependent rather than internal dysfunction. That relationship supports the narrative they want to believe about themselves. But your relationship challenged that narrative. You saw their patterns clearly. You named their emotional unavailability. You made it impossible for them to maintain illusion about who they are and what they're capable of. The relationship forced them to confront reality. They have attachment wounds that prevent healthy intimacy. They engage in defensive patterns that destroy connection. They are not currently capable of sustaining the kind of relationship they claim to want. This confrontation with reality is uncomfortable, and the avoidant would rather hold on to relationship that allows them to maintain comfortable illusions about themselves than relationship that forced uncomfortable truth. The fact that they carry person who supports their delusions over you, who challenged them with reality, isn't evidence your relationship was less significant. It's evidence they prefer comfortable lies over uncomfortable truth. The person they carry often represents what they believe they lost rather than what they actually lost, while you represent what they actually lost but are too defended to acknowledge. The avoidance narrative about the person they romanticize is often based more on fantasy than reality. They lost someone special, someone who understood them, someone they could have built life with if circumstances had been different. This narrative feels good despite being largely fictional. It allows them to be tragic figure who experienced loss rather than person whose own dysfunction destroyed something valuable. But acknowledging what they actually lost with you, acknowledging that they had someone who genuinely loved them and was genuinely good for them, and they destroyed it through their own incapacity. This requires level of honest self-confrontation the avoidant typically avoids. It's more comfortable to carry fantasy about person they romanticize than to carry truth about what they lost with you. The fact that they carry fantasy rather than truth isn't evidence the fantasy was more valuable. It's evidence they lack courage to face reality. What they carry in their heart isn't necessarily person they loved most deeply, but often person whose loss required least self-examination. Loving you deeply would require acknowledging how much their patterns cost them, which is confrontation they avoid. Deep love requires vulnerability. It requires acknowledging that someone mattered enormously. It requires recognizing that losing them created genuine wound. It requires facing the reality that their own behavior destroyed something precious. This level of honest self-confrontation is extraordinarily difficult for avoidant, whose entire defensive system is designed to protect them from exactly this kind of painful self-awareness. It's easier to carry person whose loss doesn't require this examination, person they can romanticize without acknowledging their own role in the ending, person they can wonder about without confronting what the wondering reveals about their own incapacity. You loving them deeply and them failing to meet that love with equivalent depth doesn't mean they didn't feel deeply. It means acknowledging how deeply they felt would require acknowledging how much their wounds cost them, and this acknowledgement is too painful for them to maintain. So they carry someone else whose memory doesn't require this painful self-confrontation, while they defend against full awareness of what they actually felt for you and what they actually lost. Why understanding? This helps you move forward and what you actually deserve. Learning that you're not the person the avoidant keeps in their heart creates wound that needs specific healing. The wound of feeling forgettable, replaceable, insufficient to be the one who stays with them. But understanding the reality of their psychology helps heal this wound by revealing that their hierarchy of who they carry has nothing to do with who deserves to be remembered. Understanding their psychology helps you recognize that not being the one they romanticize protects you from being frozen in their memory as fantasy rather than being seen as actual person you are. The person they keep in their heart becomes increasingly fictionalized over time. The avoidance memory smooths over complications, eliminates the difficult parts, amplifies the positive aspects until the person they're remembering barely resembles the actual human who existed. This process turns that person into symbol rather than allowing them to remain complex, actual human. You being remembered accurately, complete with your full humanity, your complexities, your vulnerabilities, is actually superior to being romanticized into fantasy version. Being seen accurately means being actually known. Being romanticized means being reduced to symbol. The fact that you're not the one they've reduced to fantasy is actually evidence they knew you more completely, saw you more accurately, even if their wounds prevented them from properly valuing what they saw. Not being the one they carry means you're free from being permanently defined in their mind by who you were during that relationship, rather than being allowed to continue growing. The person they romanticize is frozen in time while you continue evolving. The person in their heart never ages in their mind, never changes, never develops beyond the version they remember. They're permanently 23 or 35 or whatever age they were when relationship ended. They're permanently the person with specific qualities the avoidant remembers. They never get to be anything else in the avoidant's mind. But you who aren't frozen in their memory, you continue growing, continue developing, continue becoming more and more fully yourself without being constrained by their memory of who you were during relationship that ended. This freedom to evolve, rather than being frozen, is gift, even if it doesn't feel like gift. You get to continue becoming. The person they romanticize is trapped in their memory as permanent version of self that no longer even exists. Understanding why you're not the one they carry helps you recognize that you deserve to be with someone who keeps you in their heart because of your actual qualities, rather than because of psychological factors that have nothing to do with your worth. You deserve someone who remembers you accurately and loves what they remember, not someone whose memory of you is distorted by wounds or defensive narratives or need to romanticize what they lost. You deserve someone who carries you in their heart because you were genuinely good for them and they recognize this clearly. Not someone who forgets you because acknowledging what you meant would require uncomfortable self-confrontation. You deserve someone whose emotional memory is based on reality rather than on defensive psychology that rewards exactly wrong person. The fact that the avoidance system works this way confirms you deserve better than what they could provide. You deserve someone whose psychology is healthy enough that they remember and value the person who loved them most genuinely, rather than romanticizing the person who left before revealing full self. You deserve to be the unforgettable one, not because someone can't let you go, but because someone doesn't want to, because they continue choosing you, present tense, rather than carrying you as past tense fantasy. The person the avoidant keeps in their heart is trapped in past, their memory, symbol, representation of what might have been. You deserve to be someone's present tense. You deserve someone who chooses you now, today, tomorrow, continuously choosing, because your actual presence is more valuable than any fantasy could be. You deserve someone who doesn't need you to leave or become unattainable to recognize your worth. You deserve someone who sees your worth while you're right there being fully yourself, vulnerabilities and all, ordinary moments and all, full, complex humanity and all. This is better than being romanticized memory. This is being genuinely loved. The avoidant keeps someone else in their heart. This hurts. This feels like evidence you weren't enough to be unforgettable. But the reality their psychology reveals is different. You are too real to be idealized, too genuinely loving to be romanticized, too actually present to become comfortable fantasy. You were actual person offering actual love that required actual response, and actual is harder than fantasy. Genuine is harder than idealized. Present is harder than memory. You love them in real time with your real self, including all your imperfections. The person they carry often loved them, or was loved by them, in more limited, more protected, more distorted way that allows comfortable romanticization. Your love was superior. Your presence was more genuine. Your offer was more real. The fact that their wounded psychology can't properly recognize this, can't maintain accurate hierarchy of who deserves space in their heart, can't value genuine love over comfortable fantasy. This is their limitation, not yours, never yours. You are always real. You are always genuine. You are always offering exactly what healthy love looks like. And you deserve someone whose psychology is healthy enough to recognize this and value this and hold on to this, not as past tense fantasy, but as present tense choice they make every single day. That person exists. That person will keep you in their heart, not because you left or because you remain mysterious or because timing was right, but because you're you. And being you is enough, is more than enough, is everything they've been looking for. The avoidant couldn't see this. Someone else will. And when they do, you'll understand that being carried as memory was never the goal. Being chosen as present reality always was. You were always worthy of being chosen. The avoidant just wasn't capable of doing the choosing. But someone is, and they're coming. And when they arrive, the fact that you're not the one the avoidant couldn't forget will make perfect sense. You were simply too extraordinary to waste on someone whose wounds prevented them from recognizing extraordinary when it was standing right in front of them, offering everything they actually needed.